Patricia, after 19 years, we're consolidating leadership, Brent said while checking his phone. Clean out your office today. I sat across from him, absorbing the impact of his words while he continued scrolling through his messages. The corner office that had witnessed countless million-dollar decisions now felt sterile and cold. 19 years of service dismissed during a casual lunch-hour meeting. I understand, I replied, my voice steady despite the shock rippling through me. Thank you for the opportunity to have served Drexler Capital all these years. Brent finally looked up, seeming almost surprised by my composure. He had expected tears, perhaps a scene, something to justify security escort protocols. My calm acceptance appeared to both relieve and disappoint him. Human resources will handle your exit paperwork, he continued, already turning back to his computer screen. Jennifer will coordinate your final paycheck and severance. I nodded, stood up, straightened my blazer, and walked out. The glass door closed behind me with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. My name is Patricia Long. At 58 years old, I've dedicated nearly 2 decades of my life to Drexler Capital in Minneapolis, Minnesota, building their regulatory compliance infrastructure from nothing. I created the proprietary reporting system that has kept us in perfect standing with the Securities and Exchange Commission for 15 consecutive audits. My work wasn't glamorous or celebrated at company gatherings, but it was meticulous, crucial, and, until today, valued. As I walked back to my office, passing colleagues who had no idea what had just transpired, I thought about the SEC audit scheduled for the following Wednesday. For 5 months, I had been preparing the necessary documentation, running the complex algorithms that generated our compliance reports, and arranging the data that would demonstrate our adherence to federal regulations. I reached my office and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. On my desk sat the preliminary audit materials, a stack of annotated printouts only I fully understood. My computer contained the only complete map of our reporting system architecture. My password-protected drives held the verification codes required to certify our final submission. And now I had until 5 p.m. to pack my things and leave. I looked at my calendar, where next week's SEC audit was highlighted in red. 5 business days away. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The timer had already started counting down, and Brent had just cut the only wire that could disarm it. I first joined Drexler Capital in 2004 when it was still a mid-sized investment firm with ambitious growth plans. I had spent the previous decade building regulatory systems for banks, and Drexler needed someone who could establish a robust compliance framework to support their expansion. We need someone who understands where the industry is going, Harold Drexler, the founder, had told me during my interview. Someone who can build us a system that will grow with us. Harold was a visionary who understood that proper compliance wasn't just a regulatory obligation, but a competitive advantage. Under his leadership, I designed a proprietary reporting system that anticipated regulatory changes years before they were implemented. When the 2008 financial crisis hit and new regulations poured forth, Drexler Capital was prepared while competitors scrambled. "That's why I hired you, Patricia," Harold had said, clapping me on the shoulder after we sailed through our first post-crisis audit. "Because you see around corners." For years, I had worked 60-hour weeks, continuously updating and refining the system. I trained staff, documented processes, and personally handled the critical verification steps that required my specialized credentials. When Harold retired 5 years ago, passing leadership to his son-in-law Brent Covington, I had hoped my contributions would continue to be recognized. But Brent was different. He saw compliance as a cost center rather than insurance against catastrophe. In quarterly meetings, he would glance at his watch while I explained system updates. During budget discussions, he questioned the resources allocated to my department. Gradually, my team shrank from 12 specialists to just 4, with most of the institutional knowledge concentrated in my head by necessity. "We need to run lean," Brent would say. "The market rewards efficiency." What he never understood was that my department's efficiency came from expertise, not headcount. I had designed the system to require minimal personnel, but those who operated it needed specialized knowledge that took years to develop. Last month, during our preparation for the upcoming SEC audit, I had requested a meeting with Brent to discuss succession planning. At 58, I wasn't planning immediate retirement, but I wanted to ensure continuity. We should establish a knowledge transfer process, I had explained. The reporting system requires specific expertise that currently resides primarily with me. Brent had nodded, made a note, and promised to follow up. That follow-up, apparently, was today's dismissal. As I began packing my personal items, I glanced at the photos on my desk. My husband Thomas, our daughter Elaine, our golden retriever Max. They would understand. They had seen the changing culture at Drexler firsthand through years of company events that gradually became more ostentatious and less substantial. By 3 p.m., I had filled 2 boxes with personal belongings. My desk was almost cleared, save for my company laptop and the stack of audit preparation materials. Jennifer from Human Resources appeared at my door, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes betraying discomfort. "Patricia, I have your exit paperwork," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "I'm so sorry about this." Jennifer was 32 and had been with the company for only 4 years. She couldn't possibly understand the depth of what was happening, but her sincerity was appreciated. "Thank you, Jennifer. These things happen in corporate life," I replied, accepting the folder she extended. "The severance package is 6 months," she explained, pointing to the highlighted sections. "And your health insurance will continue through that period. You'll need to sign here acknowledging receipt." As I reviewed the documents, I noticed a non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement clause. Standard practice. But reading them carefully, I realized they only prohibited me from discussing company trade secrets or making public statements that could damage Drexler's reputation. There was nothing that prevented me from simply not helping when the inevitable crisis hit. "Everything appears to be in order," I said, signing where indicated. "I do have a question about the audit preparation materials on my desk. Should I leave them here?" Jennifer looked uncertain. "I wasn't given any specific instructions about that. I suppose you should leave anything related to company business." I nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, though these specific documents wouldn't make much sense to anyone without the context I've been building. They're essentially working notes. Maybe you could send an email to your team explaining where everything stands," she suggested, clearly trying to be helpful. "That's a good idea," I agreed. "I'll do that before I leave." After Jennifer departed, I sat at my computer for the last time. I began drafting an email to my small team, carefully documenting exactly where the audit preparation stood, which was approximately 40% complete, with the most critical components still requiring my verification credentials and system knowledge. I listed the files they would need, the steps that remained to be taken, and the deadlines for each component. I was thorough and professional, as I had always been. But I also knew that without my guidance, this information was like handing someone the individual parts of a watch with no assembly instructions. I sent the email, copying Brent and the Chief Financial Officer Gregory Wells, who would presumably oversee the audit in my absence. Then I gathered my boxes, took one last look around the office that had been my professional home for almost 2 decades, and walked out. As I waited for the elevator, Marissa Chandler, one of my team members, rushed up to me, her eyes wide with panic. "Patricia, is it true? Are you leaving?" she asked, staring at my boxes. "Yes, today is my last day," I confirmed. "The company is consolidating leadership." "But the SEC audit is next week," she whispered. "We're nowhere near ready without you." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, holding my boxes. "I know," I said quietly. "I just sent an email with instructions. Good luck, Marissa." The doors closed on her stricken face, and I descended to the lobby, wondering how long it would take for the full implications to dawn on Brent Covington. Thursday morning, I awoke at 6 a.m. out of habit. For 19 years, I had started my day at this hour, reviewing overnight system alerts and preparing for the day ahead. Today, there were no alerts to check, no reports to review. I lay in bed beside my sleeping husband, Thomas, and stared at the ceiling. The freedom felt strange, hollow rather than liberating. I had always derived satisfaction from solving complex problems, from creating order out of regulatory chaos. That purpose had been abruptly removed, leaving an unsettling void. By 7 a.m., with Thomas still asleep, I went downstairs, made coffee, and opened my personal laptop. Out of curiosity, I checked my company email account, which would remain active for 24 more hours according to standard protocols. 27 new messages had arrived since yesterday afternoon. 3 were automated system alerts, indicating that scheduled verification processes had failed to complete, processes that required my authentication. 8 were from Marissa and other team members, asking increasingly urgent questions about specific audit preparation steps. The rest were from various executives, gradually escalating the matter up the chain of command. The most recent email had arrived at 6:42 a.m. from Gregory Wells, the CFO. Patricia, I understand your departure was sudden, but we urgently need clarification on the audit preparation status. The instructions you provided are insufficient for completion. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss transitional support. I closed my email without responding. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway, his silver hair disheveled from sleep. Checking up on them already? He asked with a knowing smile. I closed my laptop. Just curious. Thomas poured himself coffee and sat across from me. A retired engineer, he understood complex systems and the problems that arose when they were mismanaged. How long do you think it will take them to realize they're in trouble? He asked. By tomorrow afternoon, they'll understand the magnitude of the problem, I replied. The system will lock them out of critical functions when verification windows expire. Gregory is smart enough to recognize the implications, even if Brent isn't. And what will you do when they call? I considered the question carefully. I'm not obligated to provide free consulting after being dismissed. If they want my help, they'll need to make it worth my while. Thomas nodded. 19 years of loyalty deserved better than a lunch-hour dismissal. By noon, my company phone began ringing. I recognized Gregory's number but let it go to voicemail. 3 more calls followed over the next 2 hours, along with text messages requesting urgent contact. At 4 p.m., I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Curious, I answered. Patricia Long speaking. Ms. Long, this is Alan Westbrook from Kestrel Investment Group, said a composed male voice. I hope I'm not intruding, but I heard about your departure from Drexler Capital. I'd be interested in discussing potential opportunities with our firm if you're open to conversation. Kestrel was Drexler's main competitor in Minneapolis, a larger and more established firm with an impeccable reputation. I had crossed paths with Alan at industry events but never engaged in substantive conversation. That's quite timely, Mr. Westbrook. I would certainly be open to discussion. Excellent. Would tomorrow morning be too soon? Say, 9 a.m. at our offices? Tomorrow at 9 works perfectly, I replied. As I ended the call, Thomas raised an eyebrow. That didn't take long. The investment community in Minneapolis is small. News travels fast. My company phone rang again. Gregory for the 5th time today. This time I decided to answer. Hello, Gregory. Patricia, thank God, he said, relief evident in his voice. We're having serious issues with the audit preparation. The system is rejecting verification codes, and no one can figure out where we stand with the documentation. Can you come in tomorrow to help us sort this out? I'm afraid I already have a commitment tomorrow morning, I replied evenly, but I would be willing to provide consulting assistance at an appropriate rate. There was a pause on the line. Consulting rate? Yes, Gregory. I'm now an independent compliance consultant. My rate is $1,200 per hour, with a minimum engagement of 20 hours. Friday morning, I arrived at Kestrel Investment Group's offices in downtown Minneapolis 15 minutes early. The reception area was elegant without being ostentatious. Leather chairs, tasteful artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It projected exactly the image a client would want from the firm handling their investments: sophisticated, established, and disciplined. Alan Westbrook greeted me personally, extending his hand with a warm smile. In his early 60s, he possessed the confident demeanor of someone who had weathered multiple market cycles. "Patricia, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, leading me toward a conference room. "I've admired your compliance infrastructure at Drexler for years." The conference room contained 3 other people: Kestrel's chief compliance officer, their head of human resources, and their general counsel. The meeting was clearly more than exploratory. "We'll be direct, Ms. Long," Alan began after introductions. "We know Drexler has an SEC audit scheduled for next Wednesday. We also know that you built their compliance reporting system and were solely responsible for critical verification processes. Their dismissal of you 5 days before a major audit suggests either remarkable confidence or remarkable foolishness." I maintained my professional composure. "I can't comment on Drexler's internal decisions." "Of course," Alan nodded. "What we're interested in is your expertise. Kestrel prides itself on regulatory excellence, and we've been planning to enhance our compliance infrastructure. Your unexpected availability presents an opportunity we'd be remiss to ignore." Their offer was straightforward: a senior position heading compliance technology with a substantial salary increase over what I'd earned at Drexler, plus an attractive benefits package. They wanted me to start immediately as a consultant, transitioning to full employment after 60 days. "We understand you may need time to consider," the HR director said, sliding a folder toward me with the formal offer. "But we're prepared to move quickly if you're interested." I reviewed the documents thoughtfully. The position was excellent, the compensation generous, and the organizational culture seemed to value compliance appropriately. It also positioned me directly in competition with Drexler Capital. "I appreciate the offer and would like to review the details more carefully," I replied. "However, I'm certainly interested in principle." Alan smiled. "Wonderful. Take the weekend to consider. We'd love to have you join us." When I left Kestrel's offices, I checked my phone and found 7 missed calls from Drexler Capital. 3 from Gregory, 2 from Brent himself, and 2 from unknown extensions within the company. There was also an email from Brent with the subject line, "Urgent Consulting Arrangement." I read it while waiting for my car in the parking garage. "Patricia, I understand you've offered consulting services to assist with our upcoming audit. While the rate seems excessive, we recognize the time sensitivity and are prepared to engage your services immediately. Please call me to discuss details. Brent." Just as I finished reading, my phone rang again. Gregory. "Patricia, have you considered our request?" he asked when I answered, his voice tense. "I received Brent's email acknowledging my consulting offer," I replied calmly. "But I should inform you that I've just concluded a meeting with Kestrel Investment Group about a permanent position. They've made a very attractive offer." Gregory's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Patricia, please, we're in a critical situation. The system is generating error messages we don't understand. The audit team arrives in 5 days. I'm aware of the timeline, Gregory. Brent has authorized your consulting rate. Can you start today, right now?" I paused, allowing the moment to breathe. "I have another commitment this afternoon. I could potentially begin Monday morning at 8 a.m. "Monday morning," he repeated, clearly calculating the remaining workdays before the audit. "That leaves us just Monday and Tuesday to prepare." "Yes," I replied simply. "That's correct." By Monday morning, the panic at Drexler Capital had reached fever pitch. Over the weekend, I had received 17 more calls and 15 emails, escalating in urgency. I had responded only to confirm that I would arrive at 8 a.m. Monday as agreed, with a signed consulting contract in hand. Walking into the building felt surreal. The security guard, Roberto, greeted me with confusion. Ms. Long, I thought you left the company. I'm here as a consultant today, Roberto, I explained, showing him the visitor pass Gregory had arranged. Oh, I see. They've been in quite a state since Thursday. Mr. Wells was here until midnight Saturday. The elevator ride to the 14th floor was quiet. I had deliberately arrived carrying nothing but my purse and a thin portfolio containing the consulting agreement. I wore a new suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, purchased over the weekend specifically for this occasion and for my upcoming meeting with Kestrel on Wednesday. It was important to mark visually that I was no longer an employee but an outside professional. The office was unusually active for 8 a.m. As I walked through the floor toward the conference room where we'd agreed to meet, I saw stressed faces and heard urgent conversations. Marissa spotted me and hurried over. Patricia, thank God. It's a complete disaster. Nothing is working properly. Good morning, Marissa, I replied with professional distance. I understand there are issues with the audit preparation. Her eyes widened slightly at my tone, but before she could respond, Gregory appeared from the conference room. Patricia, thank you for coming. Everyone's waiting inside. The conference room contained Brent, Gregory, the entire compliance team, and 2 IT specialists I recognized. Brent's usual polish was noticeably diminished, his shirt slightly wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. Let's get started, he said without preamble. We have a critical situation with the SEC audit tomorrow. Wednesday, I corrected calmly. The audit is scheduled for Wednesday at 9 a.m. Tomorrow is Tuesday, Gregory interjected. We essentially have today and tomorrow to prepare. I placed my portfolio on the table and removed the consulting agreement. Before we begin, I'll need this signed and the initial payment processed. 20 hours at $1,200 per hour, for a total of $24,000. Brent's jaw tightened, but he nodded to Gregory, who took the agreement. We'll process this immediately, Gregory assured me. In the meantime, can you help us understand what's happening with the system? I turned to the large monitor on the wall where they had displayed the reporting system dashboard. Red error messages populated nearly every module. What you're seeing is the system protecting itself, I explained. The compliance reporting framework operates on a principle of progressive verification. Each module requires authentication at critical points to ensure data integrity for SEC purposes. When those verifications aren't completed within scheduled windows, the system locks those modules to prevent potentially inaccurate reporting. And you're the only one with authentication credentials, Brent stated flatly. That's correct. As we discussed multiple times over the years, the system was designed with segregated authentication to prevent internal manipulation of compliance data. It's actually a selling point with regulators. It demonstrates our commitment to reporting integrity. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Without my credentials and expertise, the system would remain locked, and the SEC would arrive to find Drexler Capital unable to produce required compliance documentation. What exactly would happen if we can't provide these reports to the SEC? Asked one of the junior team members. Gregory and Brent exchanged glances. At minimum, substantial fines, Gregory answered. At worst, trading restrictions while we're investigated for compliance failures. I smiled politely. Shall we begin? By Tuesday afternoon, it was clear that even with my assistance, Drexler Capital wouldn't be fully prepared for the audit. We had managed to unlock the system modules and verify about 60% of the required documentation, but critical components remained incomplete. This is normally a 5-week process, I explained to the increasingly tense room. We're attempting to compress it into 2 days. Brent paced behind the conference table, occasionally checking his phone. What are our options at this point? You could request a postponement from the SEC, I suggested. Cite the recent organizational changes as the reason. And telegraph to the regulators that we've disrupted our compliance function right before an audit. Gregory shook his head. That raises more red flags than it solves. Brent stopped pacing. Patricia, what would it take to complete everything by tomorrow morning? I considered the question honestly. Working through the night might get us to 80% completion, but the risk management attestations require board member signatures, and 3 modules need full verification cycles that take at least 12 hours to process properly. So it's impossible, Gregory concluded. Not impossible, I corrected, but beyond the scope of our current consulting agreement, which ends at 5 p.m. today. Brent's expression darkened. You're saying you'll leave at 5 p.m. regardless of our status? I have a prior commitment tomorrow morning, I replied calmly. A final interview with Kestrel Investment Group. The room fell silent again. Everyone present understood what that meant. I was not only leaving them unprepared for their audit, but joining their primary competitor. How much? Brent finally asked. To stay until it's done. Name your price. I closed my laptop and gathered my notes methodically before responding. The remaining work would require approximately 30 additional hours of my time, at an emergency rate of $1,800 per hour, given the overnight requirement. That's $54,000, payable immediately. Brent didn't hesitate. Done, Gregory. Process the payment right away. I nodded, reopening my laptop. Then I suggest everyone get comfortable. It's going to be a very long night. Wednesday morning arrived with grim faces and empty coffee cups littering the conference room. We had worked through the night, and while we'd made substantial progress, the system was still processing final verifications when the receptionist called to announce that the SEC audit team had arrived. They're early, Gregory muttered, checking his watch. It's only 8:30. Stall them, Brent instructed. Offer coffee, give them the guest Wi-Fi password, whatever it takes. I watched the progress bar on the final verification module. 87% complete. At the current rate, we needed at least another 30 minutes. Should I go welcome them? I asked innocently. As the compliance consultant? Brent's gaze snapped to me. Absolutely not. I don't want them knowing we had to bring you back as a consultant. I nodded understandingly. In that case, you'll need to explain the incomplete modules yourself. The documentation package should include a disclosure about the current status. Gregory looked alarmed. We need to disclose that we're not fully prepared? SEC Regulation 17A4 requires full transparency regarding any compromised compliance processes, I explained. Attempting to conceal the system status would constitute a serious violation. Brent's face flushed red. This is absurd. We paid you $78,000 to fix this situation. You paid me to assist with audit preparation on an emergency basis, I corrected. I've done exactly that. The fact that the system cannot be fully prepared in the time available is a consequence of decisions made before our consulting arrangement began. The verification progress bar reached 91% as voices became audible from the reception area. The SEC team was being escorted to the designated audit room. What do we do now? Gregory asked, desperation evident in his voice. I picked up my belongings and straightened my suit jacket. You tell them the truth. 3 weeks later, I sat in Alan Westbrook's office at Kestrel Investment Group, reviewing the implementation plan for their new compliance reporting infrastructure. My corner office overlooked the Minneapolis skyline, and a nameplate on my desk read, Patricia Long, Senior Vice President, Compliance Technology. Alan entered with a newspaper, smiling as he placed it on my desk. Have you seen today's business section? The headline read, Drexler Capital faces regulatory sanctions following failed SEC audit. The article detailed how the firm had been assessed a $2 million fine and placed under enhanced supervision after significant deficiencies were discovered in their compliance reporting. Trading restrictions had been imposed on certain investment products until remediation was completed. Unfortunate, I commented, pushing the paper aside. Certainly for them, Alan agreed, taking a seat. Though I understand Brent Covington is no longer with the company. That was news to me, though not entirely surprising. The board finally recognized his judgment issues. After a $2 million fine and trading restrictions, I believe they had little choice. The word is that Harold Drexler himself came out of retirement temporarily to stabilize the situation. I felt a twinge of satisfaction at that. Harold had always respected my work and understood its value. Had he still been in charge, I doubt I would have been so unceremoniously dismissed. "How's our new system implementation progressing?" Alan asked, changing the subject. "On schedule. We should have the framework completed within 6 weeks, well before our next audit cycle." "Excellent. The board was extremely impressed with your presentation last week. They've approved the additional budget you requested for specialized staff." As Alan left, I turned back to my computer, where I was drafting job descriptions for the compliance technology team I would be building. Unlike at Drexler, this team would have proper redundancies, thorough documentation, and distributed expertise, measures I had advocated for years but had been denied due to budget constraints. My phone buzzed with a text message from Thomas. "Dinner tonight to celebrate 1 month at the new job?" I smiled and replied affirmatively. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but I had landed on my feet, better than on my feet, actually. My compensation at Kestrel was 40% higher than at Drexler. My role had expanded, and the culture valued regulatory excellence as a competitive advantage rather than a necessary evil. Later that afternoon, I received an email from Harold Drexler himself. "Patricia, I hope this finds you well. I've returned temporarily to address the situation at Drexler Capital, and I wanted to reach out personally. The decisions made regarding your position were short-sighted and have cost the company dearly. While I understand you've moved on to what I hear is an excellent opportunity, I wanted to express my personal regret about how things were handled. Regards, Harold." I appreciated Harold's message but felt no inclination to respond immediately. Perhaps in time the sting of dismissal would fade, but for now I was focused on building something better at Kestrel. The events of the past month had taught me an important lesson. True value isn't always recognized until it's gone. Expertise built over decades cannot be consolidated away without consequences. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't taking action. It's simply stepping aside and allowing reality to deliver its own harsh lessons. As I looked toward the future, I knew that the best response to underappreciation wasn't bitterness, but excellence on a new stage where that excellence would be valued. And that's exactly what I intended to deliver.